Hello, it's Riley. I'm stuck in the vocal booth here in Studio A, and since I got a good look at it, I thought I'd talk about the Sphere Eclipse C. Yeah. So the Sphere Eclipse C is a kind of complicated console, but it's a really fun console to use. So, just like with the Neve video, I'm going to go through some of the things you'll want to know if you're doing a session at the studio and you're going to be using the Sphere Eclipse C. And we also just thought we'd put it up so that other people who are interested can take a look too. I'm not going to go into every function of the console, as this console is quite complicated, more so than the Neve. It's got a little bit more of a learning curve, but you don't need to know how to do everything in order to do a session with the console, especially if you're just going to be mixing. So without further ado, onto the Sphere. The Sphere Eclipse C is a 32-channel, 24-bus recording console. The first 24 channels on the left side have line and mic inputs. The 8 on the end can be used in different ways, but don't have line or mic inputs. This console was originally built for the Best Audio Remote Truck in Hollywood, California, and that means it would have been used on some of the Oscars, Grammys, Emmys. Definitely had an illustrious past. On the wall in Control Room A is this on switch that turns on the console. And over here we keep this little switch. It turns on in the basement, the private cue system, and the plate reverb. It also turns on the NS10s. Behind the patch bay, just like in Studio B, are these big DL connectors, and those can be switched so that the patch bay is connected to either the tape or DAW. Just like Studio B, the multitrack outputs are half normal to the line ins on the console, meaning that connection's already made unless something's plugged into the line in. The bus outputs, which are selected with the bus matrix on the top of each channel, are half normaled to the multitrack inputs as well. So whichever bus is selected for a track, its output signal will show up on the corresponding input of the recording medium. Down at the bottom of the patch bay is the old monitor controller. It's not really in use, but the oscillator can still be used for test tones. This dangerous monitor controller is in use now, and it allows you to send to the ATCs or the Yamaha NS10s. The bottom row allows you to choose the input source for the monitors. Number 1 is the console, and number 2 we have set up on the patch bay as a spare. I find that useful in both tape and DAW sessions for patching in the recording medium. When playing back a recording, you could take the outputs of the ATR 102 tape machine and patch them directly into the Dangerous to skip the console and just hear what you recorded. You could do that same thing with the outputs of a DAW as well. Now that we've gone over connecting to a recording medium and also the monitoring section, let's do a brief overview of the channels. I'm going to put the console in mixdown mode and select all inputs tape right above that. That'll put all the channels in line-in mode. Over on the top of each channel is the input section, but in the input section is also this switch which sends to a direct output. And you could use that to, say, make a submix. The direct outputs have a second use in record mode, and I'll go over that at the end of the video. So, in the channel input section, we do not have a volume knob, but we have attenuation switches. So you can press any combination of these switches to attenuate or turn down the mic level. These switches don't do anything when it's in line-in mode. That's the phantom power, and this is the line-in button, but we've already selected all inputs tape, so it's already going to be in line mode. Only the first 16 channels have phantom power, so keep that in mind when you're setting up your session. Directly below the input section is the bus matrix. This can be used to assign to a bus, which is then half normal to the multitrack inputs. So this is for getting sound into the tape machine or the computer. We'll skip that for now. Below is the EQ. These are simple, really nice sounding EQs. They have these cool little spinny wheels that give you a picture and the picture is both a frequency and a shape. So you use that to set the type of EQ, and then the knobs will boost or cut at that frequency with the selected shape. Below the EQ is a phase invert switch, the on-off for the EQ, and an on-off for a high-pass filter. The filter frequency is set here. Below the EQ is the send section. Although these knobs are all different colors, they just do the same thing. We have these black quad bus mixers, which are not hooked up on this console. This was previously used as a broadcast console, so that's for surround sound. So some of these knobs are dual layer. The top layer is a level, and the second is a pan between the left and right. So it's interesting, you actually have 2 mono sends or 1 stereo send, depending how you set it up. So as I mentioned, all of these are just sends with different names for organization. They all have this M switch, which just ignores the level of the small knob and sends the fader level directly to those outputs, and a pre button for sending a pre-fader level to the selected output. Beside the dual echo send knob is this red switch, and that'll actually turn off power to this channel. That's for if you need to remove it to fix something. It doesn't really have a fun use because it creates a click or pop when pushed. Over in these master section, we have these master outputs for those send channels. So make sure those are up. This section of the patch bay is where all the master section outputs are found, and also all the Q, effects, and echo outputs, the ones we've just been talking about. It also has these effects return inputs, and those are useful if you just want to hear an effect without giving up a channel on the console. Once you turn them up, you'll hear what's patched in. And these are stereo pairs, so 1 goes left, 2 goes right, 3 goes left, 4 goes right, so on. They're hard panned. Underneath this sends is this monitor level knob, and that's not in use in mixdown mode, which we're in now, but we'll come back to it. This is the pan knob, so you can just make something left or right. And this console has an insert on-off switch, so when the insert is patched between the mic line SW output and the EQ input, that insert switch will turn the insert on or off, so you can use it like a bypass switch. This row of buttons beneath the pan controls some things that link to the master section. These mute buttons are mute master groups, which we'll go over soon. The most important thing is the solo button, which allows you to solo a channel. The solo bus can be configured to stereo, mono, and it also has its own level. So that's over in the master section. And so if you're trying to solo something and you don't hear anything, it might be because this solo program volume's down. Of course, at the bottom, you have the mute switch for a channel and its fader. These green, red, and white buttons aren't attached. They're for an old automation system. Right now, the DL connectors on the back of the patch bay are connected to DAW. I'm sending out some drums, and because we have all inputs tape selected and are in mixdown mode, those come directly up on the channels. The EQ is now on, so I'm just going to try experimenting with it. That's the high pass filter. So on this console, echo 3 and 4 are half normal to the echo chamber. When they're to the right, they're down. The left is up, sort of backwards. So I'm turning them up, and that'll be sending to the echo chamber. And that's coming back on the effects returns. So we have our pan here. I actually have a stereo drum recording coming in, but I need to turn on the second channel to be able to hear it. Now that they're both coming in, I'll pan them, and you have your stereo sound. There's a neat feature on this desk, these groups. If you select the same group on multiple channels, and then enable one as the master, that fader controls the level of all the others. So they still have their own individual control, but one will be the master. So another interesting grouping feature on this console is these mute groups and the echo and effects mutes. If I put these tracks both in mute group 1, there are these controls which allow me to mute all of the tracks where mute group 1 has been selected. And this also works the same way with mute group 2 and also the echo and effect sends for selected channels. So you can mute sends to the echo from multiple tracks at once. So now I have the mix split out on individual tracks. Here's the kick, the snare, and the overheads. These two are linked. And then there's a room on the end too. This switch that we haven't talked about, labeled local, doesn't do anything on this console. Sometimes these Sphere consoles have a VCA master, and that would be to separate from the VCA master. But we don't have one here. So now that we have things split out on the board, let's try using the half-normaled multitrack outputs to split the snare and do some parallel compression. The snare is coming out of multitrack output 2, and since it's half-normaled, I can plug this latch cable in, and it'll split the signal. The original signal's still going into the line input. I'm taking it down here and I'm plugging it into the Spectrasonic 610 and bringing it back on line 6 of the console. So we have this kind of extreme compression setting going on here, but we're blending it in on track 6 with the dry signal, which is on channel 2. So we can mix the extreme compression with an uncompressed signal. So we talked a bit about how there's insert switches. Let's use the Fairchild to demonstrate how you use them. So I'm coming out of tracks 3 and 4, the inserts. Those are the overheads. So we'll plug those into the Fairchild and then back into the EQ input, which is the insert point on this console. So once we enable the insert, now the Fairchild's working. And we have it on a slow and kind of mushy setting. So if we want to take the tracks that we're working with on the console and record that to our recording medium, an easy way to do it is with this bus matrix. So if I select 1 and 2 on tracks 1 and 2, that's just going to send the output of those channels to the corresponding multitrack input. So the computer or tape machine, whatever you have plugged in. If we want to take the master mix of the console, like everything we're hearing, we would come out of one of these outputs and plug it into a multitrack input. Just use one that hasn't been used up yet and record it back into your Pro Tools or DAW session. If you want to do something similar with the 2-track tape machine, it's actually already patched in, so just don't have anything plugged there and it's going to be normaled. There's another mode on this console, record bus mode, and that's for when you want to have a separate volume for your record level and your monitoring level. We're going to enable it here and turn off all inputs tape. So I have some things in the live room which we're going to be connecting to the mic inputs of the Sphere now. The Jupiter 8 and the ARP Odyssey are clocked together with control voltage. So those are coming into the mic inputs of the console, which are selected now because I've turned off all inputs tape, and those channels don't have the line button selected. I can see the VUs are moving, but we don't hear anything yet because I need to turn up these small faders. In record bus mode, the small faders are the monitor level. That's the level you hear. But even if you're not hearing it, it can be sending to the bus outputs or your recording medium if the fader levels are up. So now it's coming into the tape machine, and we can set a level that's optimal for recording with the faders and a level that's optimal for listening with the monitor level controls. This might not be necessary with a DAW session, but it's definitely important with tape where noise can be an issue. So here's how you would record the echo chamber. There's these that we showed before. Now those will go to the master mix, But if you want to record the echo chamber individually and just have that be recorded to your recording medium, you can turn up the echo. Now I'm going to come out of these purple outputs here, right above the inputs for the effects returns. And I'm just going to plug those into some lines on the board, so I'll have more control of them. I just need to make sure that the tracks that I patch into don't have echo 3 and 4 turned up on them, or we could get feedback, which you could use, but you got to be careful. So now I'm turning on the line inputs, the L buttons for those channels, because it is coming in on the line input. If I bring up the fader and then I bring up the small monitor knobs, we now hear our echo. So now I can record this easily, and I could add EQ, and it's going to go to the tape machine. So here's how you would set up a headphone mix. So all of these outputs, like I said before, they're really just the same with different colors. But I'm going to use the Q for this because that'll just be easier to understand, as that's normally what you call a headphone mix. Now the M button I mentioned before, the M button will bypass the knobs and just send the fader level to all the outputs. It's for creating a quick mix. The pre button will take the pre-fader level. You need to make sure that the Q master outputs are up, just like with the echo masters. And then your Q, if you want to send a talkback to it, I usually use QA, and you push that talkback button. There's the volume for QA is just above. So I'm going to turn that on. And now the QA output is over on the patch bay here. I'm going to plug that into one of the inputs. I'll choose input 4 of the private Q. Now I also have the main output of the console going into the stereo inputs of the private Q. And that's just so any performer, anyone listening, they can just turn up a mix and hear what I'm hearing in the control room. So Osani's been helping with the camera. He's going to control the board, and I'm going to go play some guitar along with these bleeps and bloops and hopefully come up with some sort of a song. So here we go. And Osani ended up putting this DBX subharmonic enhancer on the guitar, which helps fill out the low end since there isn't that much else going on, and those synths are pretty bloopy. Okay, now I'm going to go over using the last 8 channels on the Sphere. So, if we're in mixdown mode, that's the first way. I'm going to patch a drum recording into EQ input 28. Because the last 8 channels don't have a line or mic in, you can just plug right into the EQ input. Now that it's plugged in to track 28, turn up the fader. I'm not hearing anything, because for this to work, you need to have the insert and the EQ turned on. Now it's working. And I push this switch to engage the EQ. So now I can use these graphic EQs. To do the same thing in record bus mode, make sure you have your insert and your EQ still on. This can be on or off, it doesn't matter, but this one must be on. So in record bus mode, the fader will not make the sound audible on its own. The monitor level knob must be up to hear the output of the channel, and the fader controls the input volume of what's coming in the EQ. Now, another interesting thing you can do, a way you can use these last 8 channels, if you're in record bus mode, I've removed any input, so no sounds coming in. I have that same drum part coming up here, and I'm in record bus mode, so if I turn this up, I'm going to hear it. Now, if I send this channel to direct output 4, that will actually come up on channel 28. So the direct outputs will route into these channels. They come up on the small knob. So this is, in this way, this would be 1, 2, 3, and this is 4. So you can use this to submix while you're recording. Send those tracks to the direct out, and those direct out come up on these 8 channels here. So you could use that to mix some 2 snare tracks into 1 channel on the tape machine or something like that. And another variation that you can do with the direct outputs in the last 8 channels. On this cable, I have a synth, just a tone, test tone. I'm going to plug that in. So I'm actually blending in 2 sounds on this 1 channel. This controls the level of both. This controls the input of the synth. And the drum input that's mixing in is controlled by the channel that it's sending from over there. In order for this to work, you have to set the direct output for these last 8 channels to the direct outputs that correspond to their inputs in record output mode. So that's a little confusing, but 25 through 32 should be set 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on their direct outputs for this to work. And here's one more thing that I said I would cover earlier in the video. When you're using the console in this way, if you have 2 sounds coming in, if you want to apply this EQ to the drum that's coming from the other channel, you need to switch this switch. This EQ button will switch the EQ from EQing what's coming in on the fader to EQing what's coming in on the direct outputs. And that also goes for the other channels on the console as well. So on channel 1 through 24, you'd like the EQ to be applied to what's going to the monitor output in record mode, but you don't want to record the EQ. Press the EQ button to send the EQ just to the path of the monitor level. There's one more mode on the Sphere console called sync mode. It's for use with the sync mode on the tape machine. In sync mode, the tape machine is in the monitor path, so the small monitor knob controls what you're hearing from the tape machine, and the fader controls the level to tape. So you could use this with the Studer 24-track machines in the studio, or you could use it with the Pro Tools HD system in the studio. If you don't mind monitoring off the computer, it has basically 0 latency. But sync mode and tape recording workflows, I'm going to leave that for another video, as that goes beyond just the console. Well, that's all for the Sphere Eclipse C. Hopefully I've shown some of the cool things that this console can do, and until next time, let us know in the comments if there's any other gear you'd like us to do a video about, and like and subscribe to help us keep doing the videos. Thank you, and goodbye.